Hello, and welcome to NEWMOA's Materials Management 101. What's the big deal about wasted food? Part 1.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the 8th installment of NEWMOA's Materials Management 101 for state staff. I'm John Fay, a project manager at NEWMOA, and I'll be the moderator today. This series is intended as a primer on solid waste management topics for staff that are new to their agency or would like to brush up on a particular subject. Recordings of past webinars and registration for upcoming ones are available on the NEWMOA website on the training tab of the Materials Management program. Today's webinar is on what's the big deal about wasted food. This is part 1, and we'll cover why states and the EPA have prioritized the prevention and diversion of wasted food in recent years. In October, we'll have part 2, which will cover how food waste system players and waste managers are making it happen. Before we get started, I'd like to review some basic housekeeping. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and transcribed by Teams. Please keep your microphones on mute during the presentation. The presenters will take questions at the end. We have the chat disabled, but we have the Q&A, so please use the Q&A feature to drop any questions in along the way. After the presentations, we can also open the microphones for questions, and we'll be going through the Q&A with the presenters. We have some fantastic presenters for you today. Michael Nork, Supervisor of the Materials Management Education and Planning section at the New Hampshire DES. Recently, Mike presented a comprehensive overview of organics management at the Northeast Resource Recovery Association conference. And today we'll kind of give a condensed version of that. Next, we'll have Kristine Ellsworth, an environmental engineer at the New York State DEC's Division of Materials Management. Recently, Kristine organized the fabulous, I was there, luckily, annual NICE R3 Organic Summit in Buffalo. And lastly, we'll have Conor Miller of Black Earth Compost. Black Earth is a leader in the collection and composting of food scraps in Massachusetts and into Rhode Island as well. So that's our lineup. I guess without further ado, let's jump right in. And Mike with Michael Nork. Take it away, Mike.
All right, thanks, John. I'm just going to pull up my slides.
All right.
Just bear with me here for a sec. All right, you should be able to see my cover slide there. All right, so afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Nork. I'm with the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. I head up the section on materials management, and I wanted to just give everyone a kind of a basic grounding in the general issue of food loss and waste nationwide here in the US. Just to give us kind of a foundation on what's the big deal with food waste. So in 2022, according to ReFed, roughly 38% of the US food supply went unsold or uneaten. And this is the result of losses at all levels of the supply chain. So here are some of the main points of the supply chain. You've got the farms that generate and produce food for the overall food system that we all rely on. You've got manufacturers that process food grown by the farms to make products that we buy at stores. Retailers that sell those products, food service like restaurants and fast food and hotels that provide prepared meals, and homes. So kind of along the supply chain, all of these different sectors are responsible for food loss of various types. Basically, when I talk about food loss and waste, it's encompassing any food that did not get eaten or was not used for its intended purpose because of inefficiencies in the system. And I'll talk a little bit more about each of these various sectors of the supply chain and go into a little bit more depth. So looking at where it all starts, the producers or the farms, they don't always harvest everything that they produce. Often there are cosmetic standards. The markets that they sell into require foods to have certain characteristics or have certain appearance, and they may, because of various deformities or whatever, may not harvest certain crops because they know that they're not going to meet the cosmetic standards. Also, there can be things like droughts, floods, natural forces that will cause a crop to be essentially unmarketable. And so that, those kinds of acts of God can cause, all sorts of supply chain issues. There are also market forces, like when grains go up in price, like as the commodity price for grains goes up or down, or other commodities, the farms may decide that because there's been a sudden price drop in a certain product or a crop that they're producing, that they're not going to harvest because that there's a lot of expense just in the harvesting of those crops. So they're not going to go through that expense because they know that they're not going to make money on sale of that product. And there can also be labor shortages. So there's a whole host of inefficiencies just at the farm level. And in 2022, this sector of the supply chain accounted for 14.9 million tons of food loss. So food that was never sent to market, essentially. Next on the supply chain is manufacturers. So those companies that take food products or take food that's grown by farms or other producers and make them into the products that we as consumers typically buy, things like tomato sauce, orange juice, you name it, all the stuff that you can find in your grocery store. Manufacturers, unfortunately, the products that they produce are going to, just the processing of those products results in waste, like stems, peels, bones, a lot of things that may actually still have some nutritional value or could be used for some purpose, because it's not part of the end product that they're producing, it often goes to waste. Manufacturers can also produce waste because of the switching of product lines. So they may actually make multiple different products on one production line. And each time that they switch between production of one product to another, they actually may still have some residual food on the production line that they need to clean off and sanitize. And so all that, the excess food that's left on the production line just goes to waste. So in 2022, food loss from manufacturers accounted for about 13 million tons. Next up the supply chain are retailers. So these are the grocery stores, convenience stores, other markets or big box stores. These entities are often strained because of customer demand for freshness, variety, quality. So they have to stock a wide variety of different things, and it really strains their inventory management system, because they can't be guaranteed that customers are going to buy everything that they have in stock. The other thing is there's a lot of waste at this level, just due to date label concerns. So at the retailer level of the supply chain, about 50% of the wasted food at this level is just from date label concerns, because manufacturers will put a best by date or use by some sort of date time frame on the products that they sell, not because the product is actually going to go bad if you don't eat it by a certain date. It's usually just a quality standard or a suggestion by the manufacturer to make sure that retailers are meeting customer demand for freshness and quality, and also because it encourages retailers to turn stock over on their shelves more frequently so that manufacturers can sell more product. So unfortunately, date label concerns are a huge issue at this level. And in 2022, retailers accounted for about 5 million tons of food loss. Next is the food service sector. So restaurants, fast food, hotels, hospitals, event venues. Um, this sector accounted for about 13 million tons of food loss in 2022. And similar to retailers, food service establishments have difficulty forecasting demands. What are customers going to want? How much are they going to want? They may also have challenges with improper storage, you know, uh, refrigeration issues, inefficient preparation techniques, and plate waste from customers. That's a huge part of the waste from this sector. Of that 13 million tons that food service accounted for in 2022, about 70% was from plate waste from customers. I think we probably have all experienced this going out to eat at different restaurants, and just the portion sizes in general tend to be way more than we typically need. And unfortunately, not everyone wants to take home food scraps or the leftovers. So that often gets wasted. And then, so we've talked about manufacturers and farms. We've talked about retailers and food service. All of those sectors are responsible for food loss, but the biggest contributor actually is food loss at the home level. And this is something that we all as individuals can play a role in. But food loss happens here because we make unplanned purchases, or we buy in bulk because it's a good deal. I've been guilty myself of buying a bigger can of black beans than I actually needed. And then I didn't have a plan for, I only needed like 28 ounces, but I got the 50-ounce can because I thought it was going to be a better deal. But then I didn't really follow through on using the rest of those beans. So it can happen. And then at the home level, there's also a lot of misunderstanding, again, about storage requirements, date labels, uh, the kind of the confusion that date labels can create, and folks throwing out things before they actually are, before they're no longer good. So in general, just looking kind of at the big picture, there were over 88 million tons of surplus food generated in 2022. Of that 88 million tons, we did recover some. So about 2 million tons were donated and about 9 million tons were recycled, sent to composters or anaerobic digesters. But the vast majority, almost 78 million tons was wasted, and that stuff was sent to landfills, incinerators, or down the sewer. So there's a lot of room for improvement with how we manage the excess food in our food supply chain. And meanwhile, 12% of U.S. households experienced food insecurity in 2022, according to the USDA. So there's a disconnect because we've got a lot of surplus food, but it's going to waste. It's not going to feed these, food insecure folks. This slide is just a breakdown of what the EPA estimates was, the composition of municipal solid waste landfilled in 2018. That's the most recent data that the EPA has released. As you can see, there's a lot of different components, but the biggest component is food waste at about 24%. So, again, it just reinforces the idea that there's a lot of food going to waste and not being put to best use. So in terms of impacts, if we don't eat the food that's produced by the system, it's a huge loss of energy and resources. There's land and water used to grow those crops to make the food. There is energy and time and labor put into harvesting the produce, transportation requirements, preparation and processing, and the energy and time that goes into that. Refrigeration, there's energy associated with that, and other time control requirements for food that's sold in the supply chain. And any food that we don't eat is a loss and waste of all of these resources that went into creating that food. So in terms of trying to quantify these impacts in different ways, the food that we don't eat represents about 6.1% of total US greenhouse gas emissions. It accounted for about 22% of total freshwater use, which is quite staggering when you think about it. And it accounted for about 16% of total U.S. cropland. And it's also a huge economic loss. About 500 million, sorry, 500 billion dollars were lost due to inefficiencies from producers, retailers, and loss by food waste by consumers. So I think a key takeaway is that food loss is a multifaceted problem. It's a loss of the resources that went into making the food. It's also a loss of the food itself. It's an economic loss, like we noted, it's about $500 billion in 2022. It's a social injustice issue because, again, there's a lot of excess food that's not going to highest and best use to feed people. And there are climate impacts because if we don't eat the food, there's a loss of the energy and time that went into producing those food, which has impacts on and implications for emissions. But also when food waste is sent to a landfill, it's going to decompose very slowly in an anaerobic environment, which is what produces methane. Organic matter in a landfill produces methane, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas. So it's definitely a big issue. There's clearly a lot of room for improvement. And I think tackling the problem requires supply chains and waste managers to reframe how they approach management of excess food. So one tool to help guide decision making is the EPA's new wasted food scale. This was previously called the food recovery hierarchy, but the EPA recently reframed it and updated it to include some more nuance and detail. Essentially, this wasted food scale is a framework for management of excess food with emphasis on highest and best use. And the most preferred methods are on the left-hand side, with progressively less preferred methods as you move over to the right. Basically, the highest preference here is on prevention because the food that you don't waste is being used for its intended purpose, which is kind of the whole idea, making sure that it stays in the food supply chain. It avoids all those other impacts down the line from having to manage that excess food as a waste. Next down the line is donation to feed hungry people or upcycling. And upcycling is kind of a concept of, say a food manufacturer that generates a byproduct from their process that's like orange peels or something like that. And, typically they would just dispose of those orange peels, but upcycling would be a way to reuse those orange peels to say maybe flavor a beverage or something like that. So at least it kind of keeps that material in the food supply chain. Next down the scale is feeding animals or leaving food unharvested. I think in terms of leaving food unharvested, there are probably very few situations where that really makes sense. But I think the EPA's rationale here is that if the food was never going to be eaten, that it should not be harvested because then you don't have to go through the time and expense and energy use to harvest it, transport it, process it, send it through the distribution networks and all the associated impacts from that. Unfortunately, it's just hard for a farm to really know that if something's not going to be eaten, when it gets distributed down the line, because that's kind of out of their control. But again, the EPA is just trying to reframe things here a little bit to say if it's never going to be eaten, then don't put in the energy and time to harvest it. In terms of feeding animals, definitely makes a lot of sense to offset traditional animal feed. But there are definitely considerations here with regard to how, what the end use is going to be and whether there are requirements for processing the food waste so that it can be fed legally. For example, with feeding swine, there's a federal requirement for heat treatment of any food waste that contains proteins or meats. So there are, definitely some considerations there. And then next down the hierarchy is composting and anaerobic digestion. And, I think there's a lot of conversation among states and waste managers around these processes, but you notice that they're not actually at the top of the wasted food scale. The focus here is really on prevention, donation of wholesome food to feed people, and then feeding animals, and then composting or anaerobic digestion to process unedible food. And then next down the line would be sending things like to the landfill or incinerator or down into the sewer. So that's just kind of a very brief overview of the wasted food scale. That's pretty much how I wanted to wrap it up for my section. I believe that all attendees will be getting the copy of these slides, so I provided some additional resources here for just kind of delving into the topic a little bit deeper if you're interested. So I think with that, I'll pass it back to John.
Thanks, Mike. That was a great overview and walking us through the reasons why this is happening in terms of how much material is out there. Some of those stats were pretty surprising, pretty big numbers. So thank you for that. So next up, we have Kristine Ellsworth from New York State DEC. Take it away, Kristine. Well, hope your microphone works well. We'll see.
Yeah, audio's good.
Yeah, so far so good.
Okay. Yeah, a wonderful day to have some audio issues on my laptop. So if I start to sound all gobbled up and stuff, John's gonna jump in, just so I know.
Yep.
Okay. There we go. Yeah, so as John had mentioned before, so I work with New York State Department of Environmental Conservation in the Organics Reduction and Recycling section. I just kind of wanted to, briefly introduce what our group does. I know a lot of us, if not all of us, are already state regulators, so we've probably have met in various forms. But our Organics Reduction and Recycling section at DEC is based out of our central office in New York State in Albany, New York, and we also have our regional offices across the state. But out of our group in central office, we kind of have our 4 pillars that we stand on, which is regulatory oversight and technical assistance of organics recycling facilities. And for us, that's composting, anaerobic digestion, and land application. Our policy implementation and legislative advocacy. So we oversee the implementation of the New York State food donation and food scraps recycling law. Funding programs. So that's all of our grant programs to support municipalities in the organic space, as well as food banks and emergency food relief organizations. And then, of course, just any general outreach and education that we're doing. I also wanted to give a shout out to our regional staff that are across the state that also assist with our program. And they're really the ones that are doing the inspections at these businesses that are required to comply with the New York State food donation and food scraps recycling law, as well as our organics recycling facilities. I know sometimes with state entities, there's always questions about how many staff are really working on this program. So we have staff in all 9 regions across New York State that are assisting us with inspections. So the purpose of my talk today was to focus on organics diversion mandates. They're all called something slightly different from state to state, but at the very core of it, it's really just a requirement of entities of a certain size to divert their wasted food from disposal. A lot of us on this call could probably be giving this presentation, so I'm just kind of touch on some of the threads that make up an organics diversion mandate, and then kind of the real world application of what we're seeing in New York State. So there's a lot of variables that come along with these organics diversion mandates. A big one is the generator minimum requirements. So for example, in New York State, it's any business that generates 2 tons or more per week. In other states, there's a tiered or phased in approach. So, one year they might have 2 tons, a couple of years down from that, they might move down to 1 ton, and then so on and so on. Prioritization of donation is one that I would say is probably called out in various ways in these types of laws. Exemptions is another one. Some of them have exemptions, some of them don't. And that really comes to kind of like the type of business that's required to comply with the law. Waivers, some states have waivers, others don't. And then, of course, the mileage requirement to recycling facilities. Once again, some states have them, others don't. And these are all kind of things I'll talk through of how this is played out in New York State. And these exist at both the state and or local level. So what's kind of driving the organics diversion mandates? There's a number of things, and this list could definitely be much longer than what I have right here. Of course, we all acknowledge that there's decreasing landfill capacity across the Northeast and across the U.S. I would say especially in the Northeast, though. So we're trying to really divert any organics we can from landfills to keep that space for other items. Of course, we want to support the growth of the organics recycling industry. I would say is probably the core of a lot of these mandates, but an important part of that is donation as well. These laws can play a really big part in getting food to people who need it in their state and in local communities. You'll start to see in a lot of states, there's goals and actions set forth in either state climate plans or local community climate plans, solid waste management plans, and then looking more at specific businesses. Businesses are starting to develop sustainability plans and goals that they're trying to achieve. So there are a number of these mandates across the U.S. I'm going to just kind of point out two sources that I typically go for to find these types. The United States Composting Council has a nice map of state and city organics mandates. So this is including both food and other types of organics such as yard debris or yard trimmings. So on this map, and I did link it when you guys get the slides if you want to check it out, the states in orange are the ones that have food scraps collection mandates or legislation for keeping food scraps out of landfills. And I believe the stars as well are also for any local organics diversion mandates that are happening. Another resource is the ReFed Policy Finder. This one takes a slightly different approach, and ReFed is analyzing each of the state's policies and kind of ranking them from no policy, weak policy, all the way up to strong policy. I would say for both of these resources, I actually have reached out to these organizations to kind of correct little things that have been slightly off. So I would say if you're a state that's on this call, that's on one of these maps, maybe just review what they've published in relation to your state or local organics management diversion, just to make sure that the information is accurate. So supporting a successful implementation, I think, comes down to a number of things. Outreach is a huge one, and making sure that everyone in the state understands what their responsibilities are. That is in terms of the businesses and the organics recyclers. Everyone plays a part in making sure that these programs are implemented successfully. And there's a lot of miscommunication or misunderstandings that can happen along the way. Our law has been in place since 2022, and we're still finding folks who are, just starting to learn about this law, even though they should be following it. Another one is grants. So any kind of financial assistance that you're able to provide. We've been fortunate in that we've been able to provide grants to both municipalities as well as food banks and emergency food relief organizations, trying to build up, just the space for waste reduction, donation, and food scraps recycling all around. We also had another grant program in the state that allowed some financial assistance to go to private businesses, which is great because that's not something that we can do here at DEC. We also know that everyone always loves to get more funding. Technical assistance has been huge, I think, in implementing a successful program in New York State. Just being able to walk entities through exactly what's required of them. We very much take the outreach and education approach. If a business is just coming to us trying to find out more about the law, or a community group, or a new facility that maybe is looking to come online. So there's a big part of that, and I'll get into a bit more about how we've partnered with some groups to provide some hands-on technical assistance. Enforcement, of course, is always one way that we can make sure that businesses are, following the law or mandate like they should be. Enforcement can come in all different types of forms, but definitely assists in making sure that implementation is happening. And then reporting requirements. That's something that's required in New York State that I know isn't required everywhere. But reporting for us has been a really useful tool, especially to be able to compare stores within a similar sector to see if maybe their numbers are slightly off. It also allows us to compare data from year to year to see what the success rate is, or maybe where we're having some issues. And I would say for a lot of these audiences, both on both sides, both the generators and also the organics recyclers. Like I said, everyone plays a part in that, so it's important to make sure that you're giving attention to both sides. And of course, there's a number of allies that are around and are interested in assisting where they can. For us, we have found that local governments, waste-related association, and community-based sustainability or climate groups have been really good supporters of the law and are always reaching out to us, asking how they might be able to assist us in the implementation. So I just wanted to kind of give that broad overview of organics diversion mandates and then kind of play out how it's playing out in New York State. So as I mentioned, in New York State, we have our food donation and food scraps recycling law. This was passed in 2019 and became effective January 1st of 2022. And it requires businesses and institutions that generate an annual average of 2 tons of wasted food per week or more to donate to the maximum extent practicable and then recycle their remaining food scraps if they're within 25 miles of an organics recycling facility. This law naturally came with some exclusions that were identified by legislature. So that's hospitals, nursing homes, adult care facilities, K through 12 schools, and New York City, because they have their own local law. And there's a unique situation in Delaware County that also exempts them. So New York State is required to actually identify each of these businesses that is required to comply, and we have to publish a list every year. So this has kind of been our number of businesses and institutions that we've counted over the past few years. We started at 874, and now we're up to 1,145. That number has shifted slightly because new businesses might come online. Our data set maybe wasn't completely accurate when we first started in 2022. We found that a number of chains actually self-reported locations to us that we didn't have on our list, so that was wonderful. You'll see that all of them are required to donate, and then a portion of them are required to recycle, and that's based on that 25-mile analysis that DEC performs. So for inspections and reporting, we are a state that allows entities to apply for a waiver petition. We approve less than 30 of these waiver petitions every year. Most of them are for financial hardship if they are required to recycle their food scraps. We pretty much don't approve any waivers related to donation. Under the law, they have to donate to the maximum extent practicable. So there is some looseness in the language there, but we are asking them to donate, as much as they can and to kind of work within the bounds of what's possible for them, but also their donation partners. We are actively doing spot inspections across the state. As I mentioned, that's done by our regional DEC staff. I had also mentioned we're always working with businesses to ensure they understand the law and their requirements under the law. We always take that approach first before we pursue any type of enforcement or violations. Something unique also to our law is businesses and institutions are required to submit an annual report to DEC every year in March. And that annual report is asking them to summarize their donation and food scraps recycling practices. So we're really able to quantify the diversion that's happening. And in turn, we analyze that data and we turn it around and we publish a report that has to be sent to both our governor and legislature. And we have both of those available on the DEC website. So our 2023 annual report provided an overview of all the data we collected from the 2022 annual reports. We're currently assessing data from 2023, and that will be published in this year's annual report. So we've been really lucky in that we've been able to have 2 partnerships with Feeding New York State and Center for Ecotechnology, which I'll talk about next. Feeding New York State is the association of food banks across New York State. So we have 10 regional food banks. And we have a contract with them for them to provide free technical assistance to any business that is interested in starting or expanding their donation practices. They're really wonderful in walking through stores and kind of holding their hand through the process, walking through, okay, we see you're donating this. What other items in the store can we be donating? We find that, the stores kind of generally look to each category of food that is in their store. And that's, they might start with boxed goods, then maybe they'll move on to fruit and veggie, then maybe they'll move on to meat and dairy. So it kind of happens in steps. We have also found that, stores that are part of a chain, once a couple stores are onto the donation habit, that spreads across the other stores in the chain. So we have given funding to Feeding New York State to help us with the technical assistance bit. We've also awarded them money, and they distribute that to the food banks to purchase cold storage infrastructure, hire drivers, purchase vehicles. And a lot of this is work that ultimately will enable their smaller partner agencies to do pickups on their behalf. So food doesn't have to go all the way to the food bank and then back out to these smaller agencies. The smaller agencies can just grab it immediately. So between the technical assistance and this additional funding, they actually just recently reached 30 million pounds of food diverted since 2022, which is a really awesome achievement, and something that we'll definitely be looking to share with folks about how that was done. Our other technical assistance is with Center for Ecotechnology. I know they have assisted a number of states with technical assistance for these types of organics diversion mandates. But similarly, they were awarded $1 million in New York State to manage our Rethink Food Waste New York program. And so they're able to provide free technical assistance to New York State businesses and institutions, as well as organics recyclers. They have composting consultants on hand to assist. And this has been a really wonderful service in that if a business approaches DEC, we're able to directly hand them off to CET to really walk them through their options. Sometimes it's a phone call, sometimes it's the on-site visit, and they'll provide recommendations. But they've been a really invaluable resource for us. They also have provided planned five free one-day compost operator workshops. And so this, once again, is us putting emphasis on both the generators and also the organics recyclers themselves. There's always space for more organics recyclers to start business and start accepting the food scraps from these businesses. So our intention with these workshops was to really highlight, a current composting facility that's accepting food scraps and invite those who are maybe already doing it to see what they could be doing better, or to invite those who have a yard trimmings facility or looking to incorporate food scraps or just start up a food scraps facility themselves. So we are looking to expand the law and become a bit more like some of the other states that have a tiered approach. Right now, we're kind of stuck at that 2 tons or more level, and we're looking to bring it down to 1 ton or more and then a half ton by 2028. So we are waiting for this to happen. It was passed in both the Senate and Assembly, and we're currently awaiting governor's signature. And then also this will expand the recycling requirement from 25 to 50 miles. For us, ideally, the recycling requirement wouldn't be in there at all, but we'll take it if it means an expansion. And really, I share all of this because if there's a state on here that's looking to start one of these organics diversion mandates, we're more than happy to talk to you about programming in depth. We also are always looking to other states to see, what you all are doing and how we might be able to incorporate some of those programs into New York State. And that's all I got.
Great. Thank you, Kristine. That was a lot. You packed a lot into that time. That was excellent overview, and I hope that people will take you up on connecting with you in New York State as they work to implement their laws in their state. Great. Well, we're going to just keep rolling because there's a lot to say. So let's head to Conor Miller of Black Earth Compost.
All right. Hi, I'm Conor Miller with Black Earth, and we started a food waste collection company about 14 years ago in Massachusetts and turned into a food waste and compost company. So today we're going to talk about the current state of solid waste in Massachusetts, a broad overview, and capacity, cost, projections, waste. Some of this is touching on what Mike had already gone over, but a little more nuanced when it comes to municipal waste. Highest end use, for instance, in the waste audit, and the benefits of municipal composting. So yeah, Black Earth, we've got about 40 trucks right now, collecting about 350 tons a week from 40,000 households in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and businesses. We've got 4 sites going on right now. 2 are municipal compost sites, and 1 is a farm-based one, and then 1 is a just like a rented lot. And the municipal sites are really, I think, our prime way to go, because municipalities have a site and they are a yard waste site, and we are able to take that site and add food and operate it for free. Whereas before they were probably paying roughly $100,000 for a 2-acre site in cost. So we think there's a lot of great synergies when we can operate municipal sites. Here's the broad view of the Massachusetts problem right here. So you can see in 2018 to 2021, despite all the mandates, the disposal still went up. And but meanwhile, landfill capacity got cut in half. You can see that from 1.2 million tons to 600,000. That's internal Massachusetts landfills is shrinking. Combustion is staying about the same, and the exports more than doubled. So this is a great chart that just summarizes the problem, because it shows waste is going up, exports are more than doubling, and that's going to lead to really high costs, basically. And meanwhile, and it's just going to get worse, because as you can see here, the landfills they keep closing every couple years. These are the ash landfills capacity in Massachusetts, where most of the waste goes, because once it's combusted, it gets reduced in size by 75%. So then you have the ash left over, and that goes to these places, and they're all closing. So, and that's just kind of symptomatic of what is happening across New England to some extent. Rhode Island's got a little more room, but everywhere seems to be heading here. Nobody seems to be bringing on more capacity in a meaningful way around our area. So with composting, we can fix at least half the waste problem. We can fix the soil, and which will then fix the food and fix our health while sequestering carbon, because we are putting the nutrients back into the soil to make actually healthy food. The nutrition of food has dropped by like a tomato 50 years ago has half the nutrients today than it did 50 years ago. So our food is getting less healthy because we're just, putting in the chemical fertilizers, the NPK, and not the whole slew of micronutrients and other things that compost has. And meanwhile, compost is sequestering the carbon. But this is a very long-term infrastructure building, habit formation process, and it takes a long time to go from 0 to full scale. So we really recommend just going down this road soon in a meaningful way, but just start small and take it one step at a time. I think if a state like California or something just goes all in quickly, and then you have problems implementing it, then it can create all sorts of other problems. We had a couple of my partners were in California last week for a conference, and they were talking with other composters, and it seemed like moving really fast creates lots of trash problems. And one company went bankrupt because they thought that they could get the tonnage, but the tonnage didn't come in because the whole thing got pushed back, deadlines on when the mandate happens. So I think you just want to go steady and not super slow, but slow enough to manage it well. And now here's our internal waste audit for a town in Massachusetts. We dissected the trash from 200 households, and the trash, not the recyclables. So just the trash. And we found that almost half of it was compostable, 28% was recyclable, and the rest was trash. So there's more compost in the trash than trash. And when you see like the 24%, I see that a lot. In Massachusetts, I think they are at 26% now is what the combustion facilities say, but that's counted by the incinerators. So I don't have that much confidence in what the incinerators are saying the makeup is. And this is just from 200 households, so I can't say that that's the true number either. But I think it's probably a bit more than what the incinerators count. And so this is obviously it's like half the trash that could be handled locally, within 20, 25 miles. And that's something you can't say about like anything else. Recyclables, that might get picked up and gone to a facility where it gets chopped up and then shipped sometimes internationally. Then maybe it can get reused and shipped back internationally. But the food, you can eat the banana, throw away the peel in the compost bin. That goes 20 miles to your local site. That gets turned into compost and goes, another 20 miles to get turned into food again. This is a very local, easily solvable problem. The other thing with compostable stuff is that we can take compostable serviceware that's certified BPI, and I think the market for this is going to keep expanding as they get better and better at making different products. There's companies like Mars and major food companies that are looking at making their stuff compostable. And so I think that 47% could grow to be 60%. But that's only if it's composted. If it's digested, then what's digestible is not nearly the amount of what's compostable, because corn on the cob doesn't digest. It doesn't turn into liquid. And so then if it's not pumpable, it's not anaerobic digestible. So it'll go through a depackager and get thrown out. So all the compostable bags, the cups, all of that stuff ends up getting trashed if it goes through a depackaging machine. And so this is one of the highest end use issues that I'll talk about later. But and so this landfill cost per ton is an estimate, based on what's happened in the past. It might be a bit more of a cost, I don't know, but you can see the compost is stayed the same, and really that's like less than the cost of inflation, because compost routes, our average household collection cost has gone down over the last 10 years because we have gained density and our sites get bigger and more efficient. So composting is staying pretty much the same. Trash is going way up. And so, you can calculate over time, it's just going to be a lot cheaper to compost, but you don't want to wait until you're so squeezed for your cost from the trash that you have no money to invest in building the composting infrastructure. So it's really good to start see where the future is heading. This chart shows, you can calculate how your fees work, but it's going to be cheaper to compost than to have trash. So it's good to start thinking ahead of time and start making some kind of moves in this direction. This is another good just image that shows you why the food needs to go back. The food waste needs to go back into growing more food. Phosphate rock is just one of the fertilizers needed as part of that NPK equation to grow food. And this is how much more we have to mine every year to create more food. And it's not a sustainable way to grow food. And therefore, we really do need to get the food back into the soil, or we're going to have a problem. It's kind of like we're withdrawing from a bank and we're going to go bankrupt if we're not depositing back into it, if we're not depositing back into the soil. we're making the soil bankrupt. So the other key part with composting and municipalities is that municipalities have a carbon problem. This is where composting and digestion are very divergent. Municipalities have yard waste, they have leaves, they have, all sorts of costs related to the disposal of carbon. And when it's just piled up, that carbon has like negative value. Food waste on its own has negative value. But when we mix the two together, we create something that has great value, and we can send that out to grow more food. So this is our municipal organic waste hierarchy. So municipal, because some things are not good for composting. We can't take tons of liquid organic waste. We can't take tons of depackaging materials like pallets of Campbell soups. There's a niche of food waste that is really made for depackaging and digestion. But municipal waste is really ideal for composting. You've got the compostable bags that make all this clean, compostable takeout stuff, but also a lot of the waste like corn on the cob or lobster shells and the municipal yard waste, all that stuff. Residential waste is made for composting, not digestion. And so that you end up diverting a lot more when you can compost it. But the problem with the depackaging and the digestion is that they are so hungry that they want everything they can get. So they're really good at selling what they do. But at the end of the day, they're converting food into CH4, methane, a hydrocarbon, and burning it for energy. And composting is putting that energy and that carbon in the soil instead to grow more food. There is a portion when it's farm-based digestion that can go towards helping, fertilize the farm, but you can't transport it beyond the farm because it's just liquid, and farmers get paid to apply that because it has so low value to them. And so it's not really a great strategy on growing more food, the farm-based digestion. It's just a way of supplemental income because it's heavily subsidized. But it's still a step up from the wastewater treatment plants, which is almost a complete loss. It's when you're mixing the food with the biosolids and stuff, it's not going to grow more food. It's there's all sorts of contamination problems in that scenario. So again, I take issue with the EPA scale comparing composting and digestion on a similar level. There's certain food wastes that are really great for digestion and not compost, and vice versa. But municipal food waste is really made for composting. And the best model of this that we've come across is what happened in Austria, because they hit what New England is going through now started in Austria 30 years ago. And they went to a decentralized composting method, and it really works when you Austria has a 0 to 5% contamination rule. If it's over 5%, you have to either pre-sort it or digestion, and that adds more costs and stuff. Over 12%, you can never get the contamination out, so it has to be incinerated then. But 0 to 5%, I think that like the ideal municipalities for this is like suburban and rural areas. If you have like a big downtown inner city, I think I could see that being tricky, and then you're in the 5 to 12% contamination rate, and then it goes to digestion, because the digestion can handle contamination better than compost sites. And when there's more anonymity, when people can hide and not be held accountable to what's in their bin, then that becomes more of a tricky challenge. But when it's opt-in, contamination isn't a problem as far as what we've seen. So, and in Austria, contamination hasn't been a problem. They've got a couple digesters for the big cities, but then everything else goes to over one of 400 farms that take in the food waste, grow the food, and it's a beautiful cycle, and everybody has pride in it. I think that's one of the key things, is when people can see the tangible end result and it's local, the more local and the better the goal, the more pride, the more compliance, the cleaner the product, the more people do it. And it's a positive feedback loop. So this is what we like to say: compost, grow, eat, repeat. And it's a beautiful loop.
Yes, thank you, Connor. That was inspiring to hear about how decentralized systems really could work and are powerful. So we have reached the questions and answered part, and I believe that a lot of you have, I don't know if the Q&A section of the Teams is working properly. So if folks could raise their hand, I can turn on their microphone if you'd like to ask a question. All right, I haven't tried this yet. So Sarah, I'm going to try to get you. There we go. Can you unmute and ask your question, Sarah Hobson? All right.
Yeah, thanks for those presentations. I'm curious for New York DEP, how do food safety guidelines play into food donation for you all, and how do you link food, like places that can receive the donated food with places that have available food for donation?
Yeah, so the first question was on food safety, I believe. So first off, for the inspections, we still rely on New York State Department of Health and New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets is the one who does food safety inspections across the board for businesses and institutions. So when we go in to do our inspections, our staff are not trained to do food safety. We rely on the other state agencies to do that food safety aspect. We also have, over the years, really built up our relationship with the 10 regional food banks and kind of the food relief organization network across New York State, to also support the food safety measures that they have in place and to promote the food safety measures, on our end to generators when we're having those conversations. So when in doubt, our team here is not really answering any food safety questions. We always refer them to the food banks or to the partner agency that they're going to be working with. We did develop a handbook for businesses on wasted food reduction, food donation practices, and food scraps recycling. And we developed that in partnership with Department of Health and Department of Agriculture to make sure that the food safety bit said that, what it needed to on their end. And then as far as, connecting them with a receiving entity, once again, we really rely on pushing them towards their food bank or emergency food relief organization to kind of make those connections. A lot of the food banks have, I forget what their title is, but they're kind of like a food retail coordinator, and they're the ones that are kind of helping pair businesses with receiving entities. And our contract with Feeding New York State has also been extremely helpful in that.
Great, thanks. David McLaughlin, let's see if I can allow your question. There, see if you can unmute.
Yep, I think so.
Yes, great.
Great. Question again for New York, and great presentation by all three of you. With the anticipated tiered scale for inclusion of more commercial entities in the food waste ban, do you have a projected number of how many businesses will need to comply? And perhaps more so, what is your game plan for managing this increase in terms of inspection, et cetera?
Yeah, we do have an estimate, and I should have looked that up. Sally is probably on here who knows that number, but I think it added a couple more thousand for sure. And yeah, so right now we're kind of doing spot inspections, so we're not inspecting every business every single year. And I think the way that we'll continue to do that is when we do our inspections, we try to spread the inspections across different chains. So I tend to think that if a chain is getting an inspection, that's kind of spreading, it's kind of putting that chain on alert in a way. But yeah, it will be an increased workload. We don't intend on bringing on any additional staff to do it. We kind of just have our methodology in place and we'll just expand that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We're bumping up against the time, so we'll take one more from Luciana. And let's see, make sure you can unmute.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Luciana Grandstrand with the Sustainable Materials Management Group with Connecticut DEP. Thanks for this great presentation. And another question for Kristine. I'm curious to learn what was the best way to connect and also to reach out to generators and organic recyclers, and who reviews all the forms that you receive annually. Do you have like a data office? How does it work internally?
Yeah, so yeah, everything's done with our team of 6 here. So as far as reaching out to businesses, we started with sending honestly just letters out in the mail, and some stuck and others who knows where they went. Some were returned. So that was quite a process. But because businesses are required to submit an annual report to us, they file that online with us using Survey 123. And when they do that, they have to provide the preferred contact information. So now over the past 2 years, we've been building our email contact list for all of these businesses. In the years leading up to the law, we did, endless presentations to any association that would have us. We went and talked to their membership about the law, just trying to prep everyone across the board. In communicating with the organics recycling community, we have all of their email contacts because we regulate them. But we're also very present in our waste associations in New York State. I think in almost all of them, there's DEC participation. And we're also assisting in planning the New York State Organic Summit. So yeah, we have a pretty good presence with our organics recyclers across the state and municipalities. But yeah, a lot of the outreach we kind of have just built up from the ground, and every year it gets better.
Well, that kind of leads us a little bit to our next Materials Management 101 is how to do it. And we're going to have folks from New York State in that too. We're going to have Feeding New York State and hopefully someone from CET as well presenting on that. So those were the groups that Kristine talked about under contract, helping to implement different aspects of technical assistance. So if you haven't registered for that yet, you can still go to the NEWMOA website, go to the materials management section and look under training, and you can go there. Recording of this webinar will be posted there as well in the near future, and past ones before that. So I want to thank you very much, Mike, Conor, Kristine. Fantastic presentations. It seems like we could talk like this for hours. Maybe we need to do even more in terms of talking amongst the states in how we implement these laws. And thanks that your audio kept working for us, Kristine. That worked out fine. All right. Well, great. Well, thank you all, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for having us, John.
Absolutely.